The Sikha is Chelek Yud Zayin, Tzav Aleph. A very interesting Sikha. It's a little bit of a Rashi Sikha, or it is a Rashi Sikha, but rather than discussing a specific Rashi, it just contrasts Rashi's reaction to 5 different psukim, where in some cases Rashi addresses the question, and in others he doesn't. And there's a lot of details about karbonis that get mentioned here. But once we bring it all together, the understanding of the psukim and the understanding of the way we learn this inyan, the inyan of the words v'zois teiras, becomes very beautiful and very gishmak. I'm going to try my best to explain the different types of karbonis as they come along, and hopefully it will help to understand, because the nekuda, the ultimate point of the answer, is very, very basic and simple, and therefore very, very gishmak. And of course, we'll end with a heira'ah, a beautiful lesson. In ersten Teil von unser Sedre redet sich wegen die 5 Sugim in Karbonis. Eila, Mincha, Chatos, Asham und Shlamim. So the Parsha's Tzav begins, at least in the first section of the Parsha, there is a discussion about the 5 categories of Karbonis. Eila, Mincha, Chatos, Asham, and Shlamim. Und bei jedem von sie is der Pasuk Maktim v'zois Teiras ha. And in each of these it begins with the words v'zois Teiras. This is the Torah of, these are the laws, or the set of laws of. The Pashto Pirush von Zois Teiras is the simple understanding of the word Zois Teiras. Das is the Torah, the halachas von. These are the laws of this carbon. Chotz as the dinim von the Eben der Monte Karbonis and Shen gesagt geworden in Parshas Vayikra, and although some of these dinim, or the dinim of some of these karbonis are already mentioned in Parshas Vayikra, von deswegen nevertheless is masim der Lashon Zois Teiras be Parshas Seinu. The expression Zois Teiras is still fitting, weil da in der Parsha kommen zu noch prate dinim, was eine nicht gesagt geworden in der früherdike Parsha, because in this Parsha, Parshas Tzav, there are additional details that are added on to what was not yet learned in Parshas Vayikra, and therefore we say Zois Teiras. These are the laws of these karbonis, the laws that were not yet spoken about in Parshas Vayikra. Aber in Teiras Koyanim Valderech Zein Shas, however, in Teiras Koyanim, which is the Medrash Sifra on Parshas Vayikra, on Chumash Vayikra, and the same thing is in the Gemara in Zvachim, lernt men arois von Zois Teiras ha'oila, the Teiras Koyanim over there, and it's actually brought in Rashi, as we're going to see soon, learns a limud that Zois Teiras is a ribui. It's a ribui. It's extending the halacha, the laws of oila, to other cases. And from the fact that it says Zois Teiras, it learns that it's something that is all-encompassing to all oilos. And therefore he says, Torah achas l'chol ha'oilim she'im alu lo yerdu. That is a one Torah, one halacha with regards to all oilim, all carbon oilus, that once they went up onto the Mizbeach, they don't get brought down. Now there's an exception to this rule, as Rashi says, that if it was pasul, if it was a disqualified carbon before it even came to the Beis HaMikdash, then even if you bring it onto the Mizbeach, you take it down. But that's not what this limud is talking about. This limud is referring to the fact that if a carbon became pasul while it was already in the Kodesh, during the preparation of the carbon, something, the blood was sprinkled in the wrong place, or something else, after the carbon already came to the Beis HaMikdash, then even though it's not supposed to be brought onto the Mizbeach because it was a pasul, nevertheless, if it was brought onto the Mizbeach, it does not get taken down. As there, and say it in Yiddish, as the word Teiras kommt mar bezayn asugin oila. That the word Teiras is adding on a whole category, or a subcategory rather, within oila, the category of psulin, of disqualified karbonis. Veslule dem ribui, weil wir nicht gewusst, as bei ihm geht der din von oila, ha'oila ala mizbeach. That without for this ribui of Zois Teiras, we would not know that he is included in oila. And now we learn we understand that it is included in oila in the fact that if it was brought up onto the Mizbeach, it does not get taken down. The Alderech said by the andere 4 sugim, and the Teiras Koyanim and the Gemara do the same thing with the other 4 categories of karbonis. Mincha, Chatos, Asham, and Shlamim, as der Wort Zois Teiras is by Yedrin von Zeimar ben Noch Amin carbon, that the words Zois, specifically the words Teiras, is extending another kind of carbon. If not for this ribui, it would not have been included with the other types of carbonis within this category of carbon. At least with regards to a specific din, or a specific halacha that is relevant to this carbon. And the Teres Kainim specifies as follows. And now we're going to go through the four of them, the other four, Mincha, Chatas, Asham, and Shlamim. What is the limud, what is the ribui that is being learned from the Zois Teiras. So Teiras HaMincha, so he says, Teira Achas, L'chol HaMenachos, Sheyiyu Tu'unois Shemen Olevayna, that it's one halacha with regards to all menachos, that they need shemen olevayna. Shemen is olive oil, and levayna, literally in English, it translates, I think, frankincense. It's a type of a spice that was also used in ketoides and was also used on the carbon mincha. As oich menacha she'ein shi'areim ne'acholim v'minchas kayanim tu'unei shemen ulevayna. In the pasuk, it says v'yotzak aleh shemen v'nosna le'olevayna. This pasuk is in Parashas Vayikra that you'll sprinkle oil on it and you'll put levayna on it. And he said it's been a mincha l'Aaron Ravanov, and then the kmitza, one handful gets burnt under the mizbeach, and the rest of the mincha is given to the kayanim to eat. So from this we would understand that only a mincha that could later be given to the kayanim to eat needs shemen and levayna. So Zois Teiras is teaching me that even those menachos, that the leftovers are not eaten by the kayanim, but they're burnt on the mizbeach or something else, but they're not eaten by the kayanim. That even and one example is minchas kayanim, the mincha that the kayanim themselves bring. So I would think that they don't eat shemen olevayna because they're not being eaten by the kayanim. And the pasuk of shemen olevayna is written in a case where it is being eaten by the kayanim. Therefore comes the word Zois Teiras, that even minchas kayanim, which is not being eaten by the kayanim, it still needs shemen olevayna. Teiras achatos. Teira achas l'chol chatois sheyehei domam ton kibus. One law with regards to all chatois, that their blood needs to be cleaned, which is talking about cleaned as in laundered. In other words, the blood of, let's say, a chatos, the blood of the chatos is kodesh kadashim. So because of that, if it gets sprinkled onto a beged, onto a garment of the kohen, or probably the kohen, because it's in the Beis Hamikdash. So the halacha is that that this beged has to be cleaned before it could be used, and it cleaned in the kodesh in a specific way before it could be taken out or used for other reasons, for other purposes. Because since it has holy blood in it, it has to be cleaned out. So this pasuk is written with regards to the chatois chitzonios, the chatois that are brought on the mizbeach achitzon. What about the chatois apnimios? These chatois are not eaten by the kohen. For example, the par of Yom Kippur, or the soyer laHashem of Yom Kippur, or the par that the kohen HaMashiach, the kohen Gadol, brings if he did an aveda, or the par that the Sanhedrin brings if they gave a wrong instruction to the call to the people. So these chatois, for example, are the blood is sprinkled inside the Beis Hamikdash, which is why it's called a chatos hapnimis. And it doesn't say clearly that the blood needs to be sprinkled, that if the blood goes on a beged, it needs kibbutz, it needs to be washed. So therefore comes the pasuk Zois Teiras hachatos to teach me that even as afilu chatois apnimios, even the chatois that their blood is sprinkled on the inside of the Beis Hamikdash, but eino ne'acholos, and they are not eaten. No part of them is eaten afterwards. Damam ton kibbutz, still they need to be. If their blood goes on a beged, on a garment, that garment needs to be washed. Teiras ha'asham. One Torah, one law that applies to all karbanos asham, and that is that their blood is sprinkled on the lower half of the mizbeach. The middle of the Mizbeach had a chut hasikra, had a line that separated the upper half and the lower half of the Mizbeach. And carbon asham, the blood was always sprinkled beneath the line on the lower half of the Mizbeach. As eich asham etzeda, and even in asham etzeda, is dominant in the mata, also the asham etzeda, the blood would be sprinkled on the bottom. Chaz by asham etzeda states, v'kachatas ha'asham hu, even though by asham etzeda, it compares it to a chatas, and the dam chatas is nit in the maila, and the dam chatas is sprinkled on the upper half of the Mizbeach. Nevertheless, from the fact that it says Zois Toidas, we learn that by all Ashams, in Ashamois, including Asham Etzeda, the blood is sprinkled on the bottom of and the lower half of the Mizbeach. And finally, on Teira Zevach Ashlamim, Teira Achas Techal Ashlamim, we learn that one Teira applies, one law applies to all Shlamim. Let it been up, Lasa Zman Baboma Bizman Ayomayid, to emulate, to imitate the time frames, the time limitations by a bama, by a private mizbeach that was permissible until the Beis Hamikdash was built in Yerushalayim, as eich ba bama, that even by the bama, by a person's personal mizbeach, is dod der din for noiser the pigul, the dinim of noiser and pigul apply the din that if the meat went past the expiration date, meaning to say the date, the time limitation that the Torah gives to eating this carbon. It's usually a carbon shlamim, or if the person who was shechting it had in mind that it would last beyond the time frame that the Torah allots for it, that's called pigul. And even though there's no clear definition in the Torah that pigul nicer applied to a carbon shlamim brought on a bama, but the pasuk zeis teiras zevach hashlamim tells me that this din applies even to a carbon that's being brought on a bum. So this is the Teiras Kainim in the Gemara, how they explain the Teiras, that in each of these 5 karbanos, Eila, Mincha, Chatos, Asham, and Shlamim, there is a special limud, a special halacha that is learned from it. It's there as a ribui to extend, to add on another din, another halacha in these karbanos, and that's how the Teiras Kainim, the Medrash, and the Gemara learn these 5 times where it says Zeis Teiras. V'is shitas Rashi ba'anal tzif beis. How does Rashi follow? How does Rashi learn? B'pirushi al Teira, in his Pirush on Teira, gefindmen in dem Advar Pella, we find something very interesting. By the erste zwei Mal wo steht Zeis Teiras, by Elo Mincha, is Rashi mefaresh as Teira kumar bezayin. Teira achas lechol or lechul and v'chulu. In the first 2, Rashi brings the word Teira achas, and he brings a ribui. He brings a chidush that we learn from Teira achas. Bringt up the limudim for Teiras Kayanim, and he brings down the same limudim, the same things that are learned in Teiras Kayanim, that they are learned from Zeis Teiras by Oila and by Mincha. Ober by the letzte drei, Zeis Teiras Achatos, Zeis Teiras Asham, Zeis Teiras Zevach Hashlamim. By the other 3, the last 3, Chatos, Asham, and Shlamim, is Rashi garnet befaras. Rashi says nothing. Doesn't say differently than the Teiras Kayanim, but he doesn't say anything. He leaves it empty. Is tamua. So this raises a very interesting question. If Rashi holds that the word Teiras is a ribui, is there to introduce a new limud, a new halacha? If he holds that it's a ribui, then he should have explained also by the final 3, Achatas, Asham, and Shlamim, what is the ribui? What is being learned from it? And if Rashi holds that Teiras is not a ribui, even if in halacha it's a ribui, but in pshat it's not a ribui. It means simply Teiras, the laws of Farvas and Mefarish, as by Oila, Mincha is a ribui. So then why does Rashi explain by Oila Mincha that it is a ribui? In other words, you have to pick and choose. Either it is a ribui and teach me what the ribui is by all of them, or it's not a ribui and then don't teach me by any of them. Why by 2 is there and by 3 it is not? There is not. In Siv Gimel, he's going to suggest an answer which is going to refute. Seemingly we could have answered as follows. Rashi nem taka on as klal as Teiras ribui. Rashi does accept the rule that Teiras, generally speaking, is a ribui, is introducing a new halacha. Rashi emphasizes clearly in his own explanation, in his own pirush, on the words that every time there's a word Teira, it's coming to add something, to teach us that there's something that is a din that is applicable to all Eilis. As euch bei Chatos Oshem and Shlomim Kumtas L'Rabbis, and therefore by Chatos Oshem and Shlomim, where Rashi says nothing, is because he doesn't have to say anything. Or if Allah Sichaf and Talmud, because he's relying on the student, as Evet allein suchen und gefinnen in was besteht der Chidus v'Riboy von Wort Teira v'Yadin von Sei, that the student will go and search and discover what is the Riboy by each of these Teirases respectively. So the Rebbe is suggesting that in Oyla Rashi explains it because Rashi has to introduce the klal that Teiras is a Riboy. By Chatos, Asham and Shlomim, Rashi does not have to say anything because once he said that Asham is that Teiras is a Riboy, now the Talmud who's learning Chumash should go and explore to discover what is the Riboy by Chatos, Asham and Shlomim. What about Mincha, where Rashi does say something, even though he already said that it's a Riboy, and he wants the student to go and discover what the Riboy is. And when it comes to the Mincha, Rashi does not rely on the student and specifically explains to us what the Riboy is. And he says as follows, Teira achas l'chulat. This is a Teira to all types of Menachos. Lehatin on Shemen or Levena, that they need to have both Shemen and Levena. Ha'amurim be'inyan, which are discussed in this parsha. Sheyachal, I would think, ainli tu'unei Shemen or Levena, minchas yisrael shinik metzes. That when is Shemen or Levena necessary? Only when the Yid, the Yisrael, is bringing a mincha, where there is a kmitza, where the way it's brought onto the Mizbeach is that only a handful is taken off by the Kohen, and therefore we believe the Shemen or Levena are necessary. But a minchas keanim which is entirely burned on the Mizbeach, minayin, how do I know that it needs Shemen Uleveina? Talmud Leimar, therefore comes this pasuk to teach me Teiras. So why does Rashi have to tell this to us? He says, Vayo, by Mincha is da mokim litis. As der Teiras kun barbers and an andredin. Because by Mincha, we could have made a mistake, thinking that the Teiras is teaching us a different din, and therefore Rashi has to say what the Riboy is here, so that we make sure to stay and know which din is being taught by the Riboy of Teiras. Which din might I have mixed it up with? So he says as follows. The Gemara learned up from V'zois Teiras Amincha, Teira Achas L'chol HaMenachos. The Gemara in Menachos learns that there's one law that applies to all Menachos, as Oich Menachos D'loi Ksiva. Even Menachos, where it doesn't say it explicitly, steht nit bazei beferish dem din von shiareim ne'achol la'koyanim, that their leftovers shall be eaten by koyanim. V'minchas chayte, for example, the mincha of a sinner, where it does not say that the koyanim eat the leftovers, is shiareim la'koyanim. Nevertheless, in that Gemara over there, the Mishnah said clearly that the minchas chayte and minchas kinois, which is the mincha of a soita, the koyanim eat whatever was not brought onto the mizbeach. So the Gemara says menolam. How do you know? So the Gemara says the ksiva. Those menachos that it says clearly that the koyanim eat it. It says it clearly. Those that like ksiva, those where it doesn't say that the koyan should eat it. It says v'zois teiras amincha hakri v'yisep nayarin. V'aniseres v'meno yochlu arin ubanov. So from being that it starts out saying Zeis Teiras Amincha, that it includes all the menachos, and then it ends up on Iseres Bimeno Yechlu Eisa Aaron Rabbanov, we learned that the eating of the mincha applies to all menachos. That's how the Gemara learns that all menachos are eaten by the koyanim, besides the ones that are burnt. But the ones that don't have to get burnt on the mizbeach, then even if it doesn't say clearly that the kohen can eat the rest, the halacha is the kohen can eat the rest, and the Gemara learns it from V'zois Teiras HaMincha. And in order so that we shouldn't think that according to Pshat, because according to the Gemara, but Rashi is coming from the angle of Pshat. So in order for us not to make the mistake and think that according to Pshat, that Teres HaMincha is teaching us the din that the leftovers are eaten by the Kohanim, by Minchas Chayte the Gemara learned, which is actually how the Gemara does learn it, is Rashi Maitik b'Pirushay the Drasha of Teres Kohanim. Therefore Rashi quotes in his Pirush the Drasha of the Teres Kohanim. As Rashi already explained earlier in Parshas Vayikra, as the din anal in Shas, that this din in Shas, which the Gemara is learning it from Zeis Teres HaMincha, that the Minchas Chayte is eaten by the Kohanim, wird abgelernt lefi pshutai von dem Pasuk in the Friedeke Parsha, v'hoisel ha'kayin kamincha. In Parshas Vayikra there's a Pasuk, v'hoisel ha'kayin kamincha. So Rashi says two Pirushim. The first Pirush is, lelamed al Minchas Chayte, sheyiyu shi'areh ha'nachalin, zeh lefi pshutai. That according to the Pasuk Pshat, when it says, v'hoisel ha'kayin kamincha, this teaches us that the Kohen eats the shirayim of the carbon mincha. So since there's two different things that are being learned from Zeis Teres HaMincha, Rashi wants to avoid us making a mistake to know of which one is being learned here, and therefore Rashi has to say the pshat by mincha. But other than that, in any other case, Rashi relies on the Talmud to discover what the ribui is. So this is the suggested answer. This is the suggested answer why Rashi does say explain in some and doesn't explain in the other. Then in general, Rashi holds that the Talmud could find it on his own. And therefore, Rashi says nothing. By Oila, he says it once because he has to at least introduce it, that he holds that is there to teach us something, that Teres is a ribui. And by Mincha, technically, he could have left it open and allowed the Talmud to discover it, but then the Talmud might have gotten confused. Which limud is it? Is it the limud of Shira Nachalin, or is it the limud that all the menachos are to unay shemen u'levaina? Therefore, Rashi has to say that it's the limud like the Teres Kohanim that is to unay shemen u'levaina. So that way we know which limud, according to Pshat, to learn from Zeis Teres. So that's a suggested explanation as to why Rashi speaks out the Pirush, explains Zeis Teres by Eila and Mincha and not by Chatas, Asham and Shlamim. In Sif Dalid, the Rebbe is going to refute this explanation from 2 points. One is going to address the aspect of the carbon mincha, that this specific explanation about the mincha, why the mincha Rashi does say something, it doesn't fit. And the other point is going to be that which Rashi says but we said that Rashi is relying on the Talmud, that doesn't either fit. So there's 2 points, one about the mincha, one about the rest of them. Sif Dalet. Aber der Biur is nicht maspik. This explanation is not sufficient. Weil. Because. Aleph, number 1. Die Baal, das Rashi hat schon gesagt, wie Pirushe Kanal, als der Din von Minchas Shechayta Sheshera Nachalin. Wird abgelernt von Apostel in Parshas Vayikra, since Rashi already told us in Parshas Vayikra that the Din that Minchas Chayta, its leftovers are eaten by the Kohanim, is already learned from the Pasuk Vayisal HaKohen Kamincha in Parshas Vayikra. It's not anymore necessary to tell me that this is not the din that we're learning from the Zeis Teres HaMincha, because I already know, because we learned it from a different din, from a different Pasuk. So in other words, once Rashi explained to me Parshas Vayikra from the Vayisal HaKohen Kamincha that I learned that She'areh Nachalin, that the leftovers of the Minchas Chayte is eaten by the Kohanim. So I wouldn't think to learn it from a Zeis Teres HaMincha, because I already know it from the other pasuk. So the whole building, the whole structure of this answer was that by Chatas Asham Shlomo he doesn't have to say anything, but Mincha he does have to say something, because there's 2 different Pirushim, we don't know which one it is. So the question is, of course we know which one it is, because we know which one it's not, because the one that it's not was already explained to Parshas Vayikra. Beis v'ikir. Here is the more important question. As leik sich nit auf en seichel, this whole the premise of the answer, that Rashi is relying on the Talmud, that he is going to explore and discover the ribui and the chiddush that's being learned from Zeis Teres. Es legt nicht auf en seichel, it's not logical, it's not sensible. As ben Chomish lemikra wird allein wissen und verstehen, was es lernen die ribui und was stehen in Teres Kenim, bechatas Hashem Shlomim, that a 5-year-old boy who is learning Chumash should be able to figure out and understand on his own what the ribuyim are, what the extra limudim are from Chatas Hashem Shlamim. The ones that are written in Teres Kohanim, are complex details. So to say that a Mechamesh Lemikra is going to discover this on his own without actually telling it to him does not seem sensible. And now we're going to explain in the Chatas Ashram and Shlamim what the Chiddush is and why, because of that, the Mechamesh Lemikra could not be expected to figure it out on his own. Zeis Teres Achatas. So he said before that Zeis Teres Achatas is teaching us that if the blood is of a Chatas, even a Chatas Pnimis, is sprinkled on the Chatas Chitzenis, it says clearly in the pasuk, Vasher Yiza Midama Techabes. But by the Chatois Apnimis, it doesn't say. So the Chiddush is that even by Chatois Apnimiyos, they also, if their blood goes on a beged, on a garment, it needs to be cleansed, laundered. So the question is, from wann soll ben Chamesh Lemikra verstehen, as if dem din Chatois Apnimiyos demam ton kibus, darf man aber limud meyuchad. Why would the ben Chamesh Lemikra think that you need an extra limud for it? The Torah says that by a certain Chatois, you have to have a kibus if the blood goes on the garment. Why would he think that Chatois Chitzeni is yes, Chatois Apnimi is not? Why would he think differently? The Svar is punktverkehrt. And if you're going to approach it from a logical perspective, it would be just the opposite. If you're going to tell me that the external Chatois, which means the Chatois whose blood was sprinkled on the Mizbeach HaChitzah, Domam Ton Kibus is Koshikim Kalvachaimer as a the Chatois Apnimius. For certain, the Chatois Apnimis, which are more unique, more special, Karbanos, for sure, their blood is so holy, and if it goes on a beged, it would need Kibus. In other words, if you're coming to it from a simple perspective of a 5-year-old, then he would say for sure it needs Kibus. Why would I think otherwise? Why would I think that you need to have a special limit for it? Why taka do you have to have a special limit for it? So he's going to explain in the brackets here what the Hava Amina was. The Hava Amina as Chatois Apnimi is only darfen haben kibus. Why did we think? What was the supposition that Chatois Apnimi should not need kibus? That the internal Chatois, the ones that are prepared, that are sprinkled inside the Mizbeach, should not need cleansing of the garments. Is learned in Teras Kenim with a Kal V'Chaimer. Umayim Kachei Kachim. Sheshavu lechatayis achitzenius limidikul shtifa leishavu lekibus. If kachei kachim that are similar to the chatayis achitzenius with regards that they both need the dishes, the vessels, washed out and rinsed out, but nevertheless they're not the same thing when it comes to kibus. Let me stop here for a second and let me explain. Chatois achitzenius need kibus. That's what the pasuk says. The korban chatas that its blood is being sprinkled outside the mizbeach hachitzin needs kibus. That we know for certain because the pasuk says. Then there's a whole bunch of korbanos that are not chatois, but there are other forms of kachei kachim. So the question is, do they need kibus? The answer is no. However, there is a similarity between them, between chatois achitzenios and other kachei kachim. And that is that the keli, the vessel, the dish that was used to prepare it has to be rinsed and cleansed before it gets used again. Why? Because just like if a keli has in it non-kosher meat, then and it gets cooked in it, the taste of the meat gets absorbed into the walls of the keli, and therefore you have to kasher it. So too, the chatos that's being prepared in this keli, or the carbon that's being prepared in this keli, gets absorbed into the keli, and after the time passes, or whatever the time is, after the time passes, it's already noisar, and it's still balua in the keli, it's still absorbed into the keli. And therefore the keli has to have meriku shtif, it has to be washed out properly, so that way it's a considered fresh new keli for the next carbon. So by kachei kachim and by chatois, they both need meriku shtif. They both need the keli to be washed out. So we made a seder like this. When you talk about meriku shtif, both kachei kachim and chatois achitzenios need meriku shtif. Nevertheless, other kachei kachim do not need kibus. Chatois apnimius. Now, chatois apnimius don't need medika ushtifa because chatois apnimius are not being eaten; they're being burnt, and therefore, since they're not being eaten, we don't need it to be kosher. There's no problem of eating noiser. There's no problem of eating something that is man past because no one's eating it. So therefore, it doesn't need to medika ushtifa because it's not being eaten. So therefore, you're going to say like this: if kachim that need medika ushtifa, we still say they don't need kibbus. They don't need to wash the clothes that get sprinkled with the blood. Kol shekain chatois apnimiyos. Kol shekain these special chatois which don't need medika ushtifa, for sure they shouldn't need kibbus. That's how the Teiras Kernim suggests a kal v'chaymer why I would think that chatois apnimiyos don't need kibbus, and because of that. There needs to be a limud of Zois Teiras that it does need kibbus. Says Lo Belagamri nit nistaber zu sagen as Rashi farlosich as the Talmud that von sich allein kommen zu dem kal v'chaymer. But it is totally irrational to believe that Rashi is relying on a Talmud to come up with this kal v'chaymer. You have to know about medika ushtifa. You have to know about chatois apnimius, chatois achitzenis. You have to know about kachim. You have to know a lot of things. Ubifrat. When the din as chatois apnimis lehush from the medika ushtifa, wird nit dermot in Pirshashi and Chumash. The din that chatois apnimis are not the same and do not need medika ushtifa, do not need the dishes washed, is not mentioned in Rashi at all. So we don't even know if the Talmud knows this whole thing. So for the Talmud to know all this stuff and to form a kal v'chaymer because of it, to think that chatois apnimis do not need kibbus, and because of that there needs to be a limud that they need kibbus, is a very difficult thing to expect. Let's just see Asham. The next two are a little easier. When they're going to Asham Mitzayda, very bechlal that zählt erst später in Barsa Mitzayda. Asham Mitzayda is just introduced a few parshas later. And wie sagt zu sagen, as the Talmud that darf von sich allein Rislein and the Riboy versteht Teres Kenim. So how can you expect the Talmud to come up with this Riboy? As the dam von Asham Mitzayda didn't limata that even the blood of the Asham Mitzayda is sprinkled on the lower half of the Mizbeach if he didn't even learn about the whole thing yet. Unavade, and certainly is a Mechamish nicht shaykh zu verstehen von sich allein as bezois teira zedek hashlamim kumar bezayin karbonis bama. And certainly karbonis bama is a far cry from a carbon shlamim, a regular carbon shlamim in Beis Hamikdash. To think that the Ben Chamesh is going to make a correlation between karbonis shlamim in the Beis Hamikdash and karbonis of the bama is far fetched. Especially these are dinim that he's not going to learn until Parshas the A. So how can he doesn't even know the whole concept of bama, and even if he did know the concept of bama, to go from shlamim to bama is a big difference, is a big gap. So therefore we have two problems. Problem number one is that the limud that we suggested Rashi needs to teach by Mincha is superfluous, because I already know from Parashas Vayikra. And number two, the main thing is we are suggesting that we're expecting a Ben Chamesh Lemikra to come up on its own with the understanding of all these complex halachas and what the ribuy is from Zois Teiras, which seems far beyond the abilities of the Ben Chamesh Lemikra. So we're back to our original question, which was, why does Rashi explain Eila and Mincha, the ribuy from the word Zois Teiras, and by Chatas, Asham Islam, he says nothing. If Zois Teiras is a ribuy, then tell me by all of them. If it's not a ribuy, then don't say anything. And now we're going to come to a Seif Hey. Now we're going to come to Seif Hey. And in Seif Hey, he is going to introduce something that's so, in a certain sense, so simple, but it'll change our whole perspective on this on this discussion. What he's going to say is Zois Teiras is a ribuy, but only when we need it to be a ribuy. Only when Zois Teiras doesn't make sense otherwise. If we could explain Zois Teiras that it means literally these are the laws, then why make it into a ribuy? It means this is the law of this and this thing. If it doesn't fit in Zois Teiras, then we have to turn it into a ribuy. And this is what he's going to explain. Let's learn inside. The Rabbi in them, here is the explanation. Late in derech pshat is moving. If you follow pshat, it's understood. Ados was called Torah l'Rabbi suba. The fact that Torah is a ribuy is introducing a new halacha or a new idea. is norven den word Teiras is iberik. It's only when the word Teiras is superfluous. Other nachber, then there's nicht zugepasst in pasuk, or even more importantly, if the word doesn't fit properly into the pasuk. Lidugma, for example, by zeis Teiras ha'ela was the merste dinim Teiras von Eila stein in the parshas vayikra. Our first case in our parsha, zeis Teiras ha'ela. Most of the dinim of Eila are taught in parshas vayikra. So how do you fit in the expression, these are the laws, or this is the law of Eila? That these few dinim that are added on in Parshas Tzav, that is the whole Teiras Ha'ela. It doesn't fit. You can't say Zayis Teiras Ha'ela if it's just a few details that haven't been mentioned yet when the rest of the discussion already happened. Muzman der Riber lernen, and therefore we must learn as Teira l'Rabbi Suba le'mar Teirachas Chala Oilin. Therefore, Teira must be a ribu. The word Teira must be a ribu to teach me something by all Oilin, that something that applies to all Oilin. V'yal derech zeh bazeis Teiras amincha u'mezeis Teiras achatos. The same thing would apply by mincha and chatos. Was the reifen say the dinim zayin shen gezag given in Parshas Vayikra, which most of the dinim of mincha and chatos were already taught to us in Parshas Vayikra. And in our parsha, only a few dinim, a few details are added on to the longer discussion of last week's parsha, and therefore Teiras, to say Zayis Teiras, that it means Kipshute, this is the law, doesn't fit, and therefore we have to say that there is that the word Teira is coming as a ribui. Masha'en came Zayis Teiras Asham, was the dinim from Karban Asham staying nicht in Parshas Vayikra. But when it comes to the Asham, which the dinim of Asham are not written in Parshas Vayikra, dort wird nur angesagt, wer es darf bringen an Asham. The Asham is mentioned in Parshas Vayikra, but only with regards to who is obligated to bring an Asham. Aber nicht the dinim from Karban Alain, the dinim, the specifics of the din, what kind of animal it is, and when it's brought, and how it's brought, and where it's geschachten, and so on and so forth. That is not discussed in Vayikra. Ubemele darf auskommen al derech Abshat, as der Pirus von Zayis Teiras Asham is das is the Teira, the dinim von Asham. So then the word Zayis Teiras means very literally that these are the law, the Torah, the laws of Asham. It's the same thing with regards to Shlamim. Was meant a Korban Torah, which in this parsha is referring specifically to the Korban Torah. Vider Pasik is gleich Mamshich imal Torah yakrivenu. If it's bringing a Korban Torah, and a Korban Torah is an entirely its own subcategory of Shlamim. Wer doch Korban Toida überhaupt nicht der Mann to Parshas Vayikra, and Korban Toida is mostly not mentioned in Parshas Vayikra. B'meile is there's Teiras of the Chashlavim nicht kein Ribui. No, it's ein Pirish is Kipshut. You can also therefore the word Teiras is not a Ribui. It's not coming to teach a new din, because it's teaching us the dinim of this new Korban. So this answers almost everything. If we want to go backwards for a second, Asham and Shlamim, Rashi says nothing, because he teaches Teiras Kipshutai. Teiras means the laws of, and since Asham is a brand new Korban, meaning a Korban that was not discussed in Parshas Vayikra, Shlamim is referring to Korban Torah, which is also a brand new Korban. Therefore, the word Teiras means Kipshutai, the laws of, and Rashi has no need to say anything. By Korban Oila and by Korban Mincha, which were already discussed in Parshas Vayikra, we can't say that Zayis Teiras means literally the laws of, because it's only a few minor dinim that I don't know if they're minor, but relatively speaking, they are added on to an earlier discussion, and therefore the word Torah doesn't fit into the pasuk unless it's there as a ribui, and therefore Rashi has to teach us what the ribui is. What's left to explain is chatos, which on the one hand, let's be sivav. So on the one hand, Chatos was already discussed in Parshas Vayikra, and therefore Zayis Teiras can't mean literally the laws of, because it doesn't fit into the pasuk that way, because the laws were already learned in the previous parsha. And yet, for some reason, Rashi says nothing. And this is what we're going to explain in Eisvav. Es bleibt aber Gott nicht verstandig. Rashi is going to based on this answer, what remains not yet understood is why Rashi says nothing about Sachatas. It can't be translated literally, because most of the Dinichatas are already written in Vayikra, Parshas Vayikra. Nor is complete rabbis. Therefore, it must be that the word Teiras is coming as a ribui. So in that case, why does Rashi not say anything? Muzmin Zogin, as a derech hapshat, is the ribui von teretz achatos as a poshit, as Rashi darf is going to schreiben befeiros. The ribui of chatos is so simple that Rashi doesn't even have to say it. It's self-understood. Even though we said earlier that the dinim that we mentioned before is too difficult for the Talmud to figure out, this one is different. In other words, the limud of the Teras Kayanim by Chatos, that Sheyeh Domim Ton Kibus, that's beyond the Talmud's ability to figure out on his own. That you need a limud for it. But what the Rebbe is going to do here is going to introduce a different limud, ribui, from Zeis Teres Achatos, one that even the Mechamis L'Mikra would figure out on their own. And therefore Rashi has to say nothing. And he explains. And here's the explanation. So again, Eila and Shlamim say nothing because the Pirush of Teres is Kipshute. It means literally the laws of. Eila Min Rashi explains what the limud is, what the ribui is because since the laws of Eila Mincha are discussed in Parshas Vayikra, therefore the word Torah is superfluous. It must be here for a ribui, and since we can't expect the Ben Chamis Mikra to figure out on his own, Rashi tells us what the ribui is. What about Mincha? What about Chatos? Chatos, on the one hand, we already learned about it in Parshas Vayikra, and therefore it must be it can't be kipshuta, it can't be literal, it must be a ribui. But Rashi doesn't say anything because the ribui is something that is self-understood. And we're going to explain how that is right now. First thing that he says after Zeis Teres Achatos is that in the place where you shech the carbon oila, that's where you shech the carbon chatos. As chatos tam, all the chatois, that all the chatois, afilu chatos from Kein HaMashiach chatos hakol, even the chatos that's brought by the Kohen Gadol, or the chatos that's brought by the kol after the Bezdin gave a mistaken ruling, which by these chatois, the pasuk does not tell us explicitly that shchita is betzafen. It doesn't say which means in tzafin. Nevertheless, is a shchita betzafen. The pasuk is telling us that every chatos, even if it doesn't tell us in the pasuk where it should be kishachten, here it's telling us where it has to be slaughtered. It has to be slaughtered in tzafin. So that's clear in the pasuk. It says aber da ein min in carbon chatos, but there's one subcategory of carbon chatos that we might have thought as that even though it says chatos tam that all chatois are shechted b'makom ha'oila, which isn't tzafin, is aber zayin shchita nit b'tzafin. We would think that this shchita of this specific category of chatos is not in tzafin. When das is a carbon oil of yered, this was referring to a carbon oil of yered. Carbon oil of yered is a carbon that's on a sliding scale. As is told in the Yechelis mentioned, it depends on the person's financial ability. If he's wealthy, bring it on a cave. I'm not saying kizba isirasizim. He brings either a female sheep or a female goat. And if he can't afford an animal, then he brings 2 doves or 2 pigeons. And if he can't afford even 2 birds, then he would bring flour, a mincha. Since by this type of chatos, it's possible that there'll be no shchita at all. If it's a carbon, if it's a mincha, if it's a flour offering. And there isn't even by flour. It's not even a bird that is killed in a specific way called melika, which is similar to the way it is by oila. In other words, both shchita and melika are by chatas and by oila. But by carbon oil there's a seilis lechatas. It's flour. So there's no shchita at all, not even melika. He's mistaber tzazagin. So I would think to say, shchita is nitkin in yinikri in their kapara. That shchita is not a primary detail, not an important element in the kapara of this person, in the atonement of this person. And therefore, I would think that shchita does not have to be in tzafin. It doesn't have to be in the same place as the oila. Even if we're bringing a seh which does need shchita, I would think that since sometimes this specific carbon does not need a shchita, therefore the location of the shchita doesn't matter. Of them kum der ribuy zeis teres achatos, and therefore this pasuk comes to teach me. As teira achas l'chol achatois, so there's one law that applies to all chatois. We bow to the keicha carbon elevated as achatos, and since the carbon elevated is part of the category, the overarching category of chatos, is chitas b'tzafon and chitas b'tzafon. So Rashi is telling us now, or the Rebbe is telling us now, that according to Rashi, the ribuy of zeis teiras is not that menachos she'ein shireh nachal and tu'una shemen olevena, that all menachos need shemen olevena, which is what the Torah's Kerim said. Rashi is telling us that the chiddush of zeis teiras by mincha is that all menachos, by chatos. I just made a mistake there. When it comes to chatos, the chiddush is not that sheyehei davam ton kibus, but which is what the Teras Kainim says. But the chiddush of zeis teras by chatos is that all chatois, even carbon elevated, is shchitas and batzafin. Now, why does Rashi not tell it to us? Rashi doesn't say anything about chatos. When Rashi therefore is going into his teaching meferish, and Rashi has no need to explain it out clearly. Since this is the first detail that is mentioned after Zeis Teres Achatas, und die Dinim von Chatas hat erst gelernt Parshas Vayikra, and he already learned the rest of the Dinim in Parshas Vayikra, so he knows right away to apply this B'makom Shachad Achatas to all the Dinim of Chatas, because it's the first thing that's said. Therefore, if he's looking for a chiddush, he's going to go to Rabbi. Makmash l'shachad achatos. So t'shachad ha'elo, v'akash l'shachad ha'elo l'shachad achatos. So right away, the Talmud, even in Ben Chumash, he looks right there in the pasuk. He sees what the limud is. He knows right away what it is because it's the first thing that's there. So therefore, to summarize, Shema Shlamim, it says nothing. Rashi says nothing because Teiras is kipshutei. Shloila and Mincha, Rashi explains what the ribuy is, because since Teiras can't mean kipshutai, therefore it must be a ribuy, and we don't rely on the Melchamish the Mikra to figure it out, because the dinim are too complex, and therefore Rashi has to tell it to us. And by chatos, it can't mean kipshutai because chatos was discussed in Parshas Vayikra. So therefore it must be l'rabbis, but since the ribuy is that shchitas on batzafon, which is written right away there in the pasuk, it is self-understood even by the Mechamish the Mikra, and Rashi has no need to say anything. We have one last question before we get to the Hira, and that question is, what are the mincha? If the Talmud is trusted, is reliable, that you look into the psukim and you'll see what the ribuy is, then why doesn't he figure out that the ribuy of tu'una shemen u'levaina by menachos? Why does Rashi have to tell it to us? And that's what we're going to discuss in Sif Zayin for two reasons. This makes it difficult for us to understand why Rashi has to teach us the ribuy by mincha, that the Zeis Teres is teaching me that all menachos need shemen u'levaina. Why does Rashi not rely on the Talmud that'll figure it out, just like by the Chatos, where he relies on the Talmud to figure it out? Is the beard in them? And the explanation is very simple. I mean, everything is simple after you learn it. Al derech pshat is mistaber. If you follow pshat, it's understood. This makes sense to say. As zeis teiras kunt marbe sein teira achas lakoil. That the Zeis Teiras, if it's a ribuy that is connected with something that's being discussed in this parsha. Zeis Teiras is the introduction. This is the law of the chatas, the mincha. And then it's going to be something that's going to tell me what it is. Das heißt, as der noch kummendiker din, that the following din is shayach by alle minim from the carbon, is applicable to all different types of this carbon. Even one type that logically we would have thought not to include it with the rest of them. Yet nevertheless, because it says Zeis Teiras, I say, okay, let's include everything into this thing that's discussed in this parsha. But in the fall from carbon mincha, but when we talk about the carbon mincha, is the ribuy from Teiras b'shayches some din for tunas shemen levaina. The ribuy of Teiras is teaching me that all menachos need shemen and levaina. Was steht nicht in unserer Parsha, which the din of Yatzak Hashemen v'Nasna Lalevaina is not written in this week's Parsha, in Parsha's Tzav. Here it says that the Kohen picks up the mincha, a piece of the mincha, with the soilus and the levina that's on it. But not the original din that it needs shemen and levina. Not in Parshas Vayikra. That is mentioned in Parshas Vayikra. So I might have thought that this, since Al Derech Hapshat, I would have thought that this Zeistedas is being marbe something that there is written after, in this following parsha, after the words Zeistedas, and the din of Tunis Shemen Ulevein is not written in this parsha, it's written in the parsha Vayikra. So I would have thought that this is not the Ribuy. Bavorent Rashi has the Ribuy main tatum din. So therefore Rashi has to tell us that that's this the din. In other words, by Chatos we said that Rashi does not tell us what the Ribuy is, because the Talmud could figure it out from the Psukim itself. But by Mincha, the Talmud may not figure it out from the Psukim itself, because the original din of Shemen Ulevein is written in the Parsha Vayikra. And he might think that the Ribuy is coming from something that's written in this Parsha, after the words Zeistedas. And therefore Rashi has to come and say no, that this Parsha mentions Shemen Ulevein, which is referring to the din of Shemen Ulevein, that menachos need shemen uleveina, and that is being applied to all menachos from the pasuk Zeistedas. Nochatam, and there's one more reason why Rashi has to explain the ribuy of mincha, that all menachos need shemen uleveina, even though we want the Talmud to figure it out on his own. Another reason why we would not be we would not know without Rashi telling us that Teres Mincha is being marbe, is including all menachos, that they need shemen uleveina, specifically by Minchas Koyanim. In other words, the whole chiddush of Minchas Koyanim, because Minchas Koyanim is ein shiarei na'achalin. Menachos that the shiarei na'achalin, that the leftovers are eaten by the Koyanim, we know clearly from the pasuk that it needs shemen uleveina. But Minchas Koyanim, which is not eaten by the Koyanim, we have to know. It doesn't say clearly. We need a ribuy that tuna shemen uleveina. So, if not for Rashi telling it to us here, I may not have known it. That by Minchas Koyanim, you need shemen uleveina. Why? Because the din of Minchas Koyanim, velchashtei noch der parsha from v'zeis mincha, hayimid zichah mit abazundrin dibur v'yidaber Hashem al-Moshe lemer zeh korban arubanav. The din of Minchas Koyanim. In other words, when it says zeis teras mincha, it's talking about all menachos. Then it says v'yidaber Hashem, and begins a new set of halachos about Minchas Koyanim, that Aaron ubanav have to bring a korban mincha. Und wie bald das zwischen sie ist nicht nur die Avsaka von der Bazunder Parsha. And since between Zeis Teres HaMenachis, and Zeis Teres HaMincha, and Vaydaber Hashem, Zeh Korban Aaron Rabbanov, Minchas Koyanim, there's not just a separation that it's in its own Parsha. There's a stuma or a psucha, there's a space in the Torah between the two. Was die Avsaka is a Parsha, is eine litin Revach, le Moshe, le Izbeinin, ben Parsha, le Parsha. Uben Inyan, Inyan, which these spaces in the Torah, is because the Eibishter gave time to Moshe, a break to Moshe to be able to think about it between each parsha and between each thing that he was taught. So it's not just that. By Korban Aaron Rabbanim, it's not just a hefsek for Moshe to digest what he was just taught before being taught a new thing. By Minchas Koyanim, it's in its by Daber Hashem, it's in its own dibur. Is schwer zu sagen, that when it says Zeis Teres HaMincha, that's supposed to be an all-encompassing din by all menachos, that it would include also Minchas Koyanim. As the Zelbet Nivial menachos, that it has the same din as all menachos. But it's upgetelt with that I am dibur, because it's so separated with its own dibur, with its own teaching, with its own speaking by or passage by the Eibishter. Was weist as die Mincha is a nayer Bazunder Inyan, which seems to show that this is a totally separate concept. Mikose came from them was a feeling Bazunder Suge Karbonis. Mincha Shon Shlam was nicht abgeteilt mit Bazunder and Dibur. Especially since when we talk about two totally different categories of Karbonis, Osham and Mincha and Shlamim, there's no Vaydaber in between. As it's zwischen the Hefsek von a Parsha, all there is a separation of Parsha, a space in the Torah. So by Minchas HaKoyanim, which has a whole Vayedaber, I might have thought that it's not included in Zeis Teretz HaMincha. And Minchas Koyanim, it does not need Shemen Ulevaina. And therefore, Rashi has to come tell me that this Ribui applies to Minchas Koyanim, because otherwise I may not have guessed it. May not have figured it out. So, to summarize very quickly, according to the beer of the Sicha, by Oila, Rashi explains the Ribui because Zeis Teiras can't be Kipshutai, because the dinim of Oila were already taught in Vayikra. Therefore, it must be here Rabbis, and therefore Rashi explains that's what the Ribui is. By Mincha, same thing. It can't be Kipshutai, can't be literal, so therefore it has to be a Ribui. And Rashi has to tell us the Ribui that to Unais, Shemen Ulevaina, that all Mincha, even Minchas Koyanim, needs Shemen Ulevaina. And the reason why Rashi has to tell it to us and cannot rely on us to figure it out is number one, because the din of Shemen Ulevaina is not in this parsha, it's in a previous parsha. And number two, because Minchas Koyanim is in a separate dibur, and I might have thought that it was not included. When it comes to Karban Chatas, Rashi says nothing. Even though Teiras is a Ribui, but it's a Ribui, according to the Sicha, the Ribui of Zeis Teres HaMincha is that all Chatois, even Karban Elevated, is Chitason Bat Sofain. And the reason why Rashi doesn't say anything is because it's self-evident from the Psukim itself. And by Oshtam and Shlamim, Rashi says nothing because Zeis Teiras is learned literally. It means these are the dinim of, because since Karban Asham and Karban Toida, which is the Shlamim that's being discussed here, is being discussed here for the first time, it makes perfect sense to say in the pasuk Zeis Teiras, these are the laws of, and there's no need to see it as a ribui. That's the beer in Rashi. Now comes the Geschmacke Hira. Al Pikola now, Kumtois. So based on this comes out, as the Hesafa from the Parsha Karbonis and Nunzer Parsha, that the addition of the Karbonis in our Parsha, Parsha's Tzav, of the Karbonis in Parsha Vayikra and the Karbonis in Parsha Vayikra, Bashteit von Svei Sugim consists of two categories. Aleph, Atsuga Funaya Prote Dinim, in the Karbonis Eila Mincha and Chatas, that there is an addition of details of dinim within the Eila Mincha and Chatas, based the Hesav of Anach Karbanis. And then there's also the addition of new Karbanis, Asham V'Toida. But Zeire Dinim Shtei Bechlal Nit Frier, which their dinim are not discussed at all previously. And similarly within the first three of Eila Mincha and Chatas, which are here primarily to discuss extra dinim, is dot the ribui from Zeis Teiras. There is the addition that's learned from Zeis Teiras, was kunt marbe sein noch amin von dem Karban, which is also teaching us an extra type within the Karban. Teira achas lechol ha'oilin menachis v'chulu. That is one teira for all oilin, for all types of oilin. That even an oilin that we didn't talk about yet, we're learning about it now. So in other words, there's new dinim and there's new karbonis. And even within the new dinim, there are certain subcategories of karbanis that are introduced here that weren't introduced previously. So we have new dinim and we have new karbanis. And Rashi is mefared its same meaning by carbon, and Rashi himself expresses it in by the first carbon. It says Rashi says like this: this inyan of Zeis Teres is coming for two reasons. Aleph, al hekter chalavim veivarim she'ekasher kol halayla, on the bringing on the mizbeach of the fats and the limbs that you could be on the mizbeach a whole night. But dosh steht gleich nach dem pasuk on mizbeach kol halayla the baker, which is written right away in the pasuk on the mizbeach a whole night till the morning, which that's a prat in the din that the karbanis, the oila that we already know about, you're allowed to be maktir it on the mizbeach at night. Beis, another thing that this parsha is teaching us, to teach us on disqualified karbanis, which ones, if they went out to the mizbeach, they have to come down, and which don't have to come down. Shekol Teira, the Rabbi says, Ashi says that every time he says the word Teira, it's teaching us something new, and he's telling us over here on the psulin, psulin is a new type of carbon. Within oila, there's an oila that has a new category. It's a pasila oila. But it's a pasila oila that's still a carbon. And that's why Yimala Yerdu. So, in short, the Heisafa, the new editions of Parshas Tzav, is both in the area of introducing new halachas new dinim, as well as introducing new karbanos or new subcategories of karbanos. The difference between these two, what's the difference between saying it's a new din or if it's a new carbon, is a chiduk from echos and kamas. It's the difference between kamas and echos, between quantity and quality. The carbon. The first, when we say the details of dinim that are being learned, this is in addition to the quality of the carbon. Naya prate dinim in demselben carbon, baiten deiches from carbon. If you learn new dinim about a specific carbon, it changes the quality of the carbon. It's being done differently. And the second, which is introducing new carbonis, is Isafin Kamus, Nochamin carbon. It's a brand new kind of carbon. Or else we're learning that more types of carbonis have the same din. Like if you're applying that all chatois is chitosim batzofin. So you're basically saying that there's more carbonis that fit into the din of chitosim batzofin. So it's a quantity thing. So you have certain things, like for example, it changes the echos of the carbon. And not only you can mark it by night, by day, you mark it by night as well. And then you have the kamus. You have new types of carbonis, or new dinim, or new or more a number of more carbonis that fit into the same din that was learned. So this is very important. That you have different types. What we Parashas Tzav is introducing a new echos in carbon, a new quality in carbonis, and more quantity of carbonis. Und von dem was die Esaf is nicht nur an echos dicker, durch zugeben noch Proteinen, nur kamas dicker durch zugeben noch a carbon. And since the addition is not just in quality by learning more dinim about it, but it's also in quantity by learning about new carbonis, is da'ir of Hashem. This teaches us this teaches us a lesson in avodas Hashem. Gashmius mest sich meistens in kamas. Gashmius material things are mostly measured by quantity. How much money a person has, how many square foot the house is, how many miles per hour the car can go. It's all quantitative measurements. Ruchnius and echos. Spirituality can be measured in space, in numbers. It's measured in quality. And what's the lesson over here? As the weg to a safa in echos v'ruchnius, that if you want to increase and intensify the spirituality and the quality, is amal davke durch a safa in the avedim it kamas v'gasmius. Sometimes you have to increase the quantity and the materialism. Der weg zu der Griechen, der emisar ilu in aveda ruchnis. How do you reach the true heights, the greatest heights in your spiritual Aveda? Is nicht durch abschließen sich von Welt. It's not by locking yourself away from the world. Vernehmen sich nur mit ruchnisdike inyanim and be involved solely with spiritual matters. Nur durch der Aveda zu machen noch gashmisdike inyanim akarban Hashem. If you want to reach the greatest spiritual heights, you have to build your quantity as well. You have to get involved with the physical, material things and bring them as a carbon to Hashem. Und only when you work in this manner of trying to overpower the spirit, tzura literally means the form. Chaimer is the raw material. When Chassidus uses this expression, chaimer refers to the gashmius, tzura refers to the ruchnius. When you give raw material, when you give it a form, when you give it a meaning, a purpose. So when you do this avodah, that you overpower the spirit over the material, as from chayma machman surah, that from raw material you make something that is usable. From kamus machman echos, from quantity you transform quantity into quality, which is I don't know, but this is a unique concept. Not only are you working with quality, you're working with quantity, you're transforming your quantity into quality. He gives a beautiful example in Torah 46 of a minyan. If you have 9 people, you have 9 people. You have 10 people, really all you did is you went up in Kamos. You have one more person. But now the echos changed. Now instead of having 9 random people, you now have a minyan. So the Kamos became an echos. The Kamos affected the echos. That by adding another person to the group, it changed the whole entity, the whole definition of the group. So when you do this avodah, that you transform kamus into echos, this elevates you much greater, that it reaches a much higher level of the spiritual avodah of the neshama. This is with regards to the person himself, that a person himself wants to grow in Avodas Hashem. He can't focus only on Ruchnius, he has to also focus on Gashmius and try to bring Gashmius in as a carbon to Hashem and transform the Gashmius into Ruchnius. Sif Tes, the Aveda from Aisafa Bekamus Nabreted in moving, and to take this idea of working, of increasing the quantity in order to become closer to Hashem in a more broader understanding, is the Isaskus zu mekarev sein, was aggressor kamus von Iden Latero mitzvahs would be to be mekarev, to bring closer a much greater quantity of Yidden to Torah mitzvahs. So much so that even those that in their outward appearance they seem not fitting for the Mizbeach psulin, they would go into the category of disqualified. Rahman al-Islam, he brings even them onto the Mizbeach. And once you bring them up, they don't come down. You elevate them to such a point that they don't even want to go down anymore. You don't take them down, and in the lesson you bring a Yid, you elevate him to such a point that he stays up, he doesn't go down. And through this, the Eibishter illuminates the eyes of both of them. That by the person who's being Mekarev, the other Yid, he is given a whole new great light that is beyond anything he could have expected to accomplish through his own Avodah. Something that Rebbe would speak about a lot. That when we help another Yid, we gain from it as well. So much so that it changes his whole quality. His whole level of Aveda changes. And it bleibt zugebunden. He remains connected. Is oilaif in Mizbeach. He gets elevated onto the Mizbeach. Which slaughters away and nullifies his Metzias, his physical entity, which is getting in the way of his spiritual Aveda. Which elevates him beyond any limitations. All night till the morning, that it elevates him through the whole darkness, the whole night of Golus, until it brings him to the morning light of the light of the Geula, and all this comes through recognizing that it's not enough Echus, you have to have Kamus. Not enough to have one Yid that's doing everything perfectly, you have to have a lot of Yidden, even if it's not yet perfect. You have to be Mekad of them to the Mizbeach, to be Mekad of them to the Eibishter. And when we do that, this brings us to Kol HaLayla Ad HaBoker, or brings us to the light of the Geula. Wow. I did prepare a chart. It's in Hebrew, but I prepared for myself as I was learning the Sikha. I prepared a chart. It's going to hopefully be on the website and on the app. And if it helps you, feel free to look at it and download it. And hopefully it'll aid in your understanding of the Sikha, which is a phenomenal, beautiful Sikha. It takes so many details that we don't always, a lot of them we know from Rambam, but there's so many details, and it ties it all together so beautifully. All right.